because most legislatures are members of the major parties, and they're not really concerned about the interest of independents or minor party candidates. So sometimes it's not that they're trying to be unfair, it's just that they don't consider the interest of other individuals who aren't just like them, members of the major parties.
So my name is Laya Bush. I'm the Region 2 representative of the Libertarian Party of Washington State, and I've been responsible for ballot access in Washington. This has been a real adventure with COVID this year. So Washington State is one of the easier states for getting ballot access for a minor party. We only need to get 1,000 signatures. A lot of states need to get many thousands of signatures, but for us it's just 1,000. But the way they restrict it is based on a lot of weird rules and regulations. And so, for example, one of the rules that really impacted us this year was that you need to have a gathering of at least 100 people in order to do signature gathering. Well, with COVID, gathering that many people isn't legal. And so when there are two conflicting laws, how do you determine what's right? And the Secretary of State's office for the first month or so of the process was just kind of shrugging their shoulders because they didn't really have a clear answer to how to handle that. And eventually I kept telling them I needed a specific rule, and they finally wrote one, which I was very grateful for, to give some guidance. And it allowed us to do a virtual convention, which is very helpful. But our signatures do have to be wet signatures, and so that means that people have been having to mail us lots of signatures in the mail. So I've been opening, hundreds and hundreds of envelopes to get all of these signatures in, and thankfully we have hit our threshold. But it's nerve-wracking because you don't really know what might be a limiting factor. I asked what makes a signature valid, and they couldn't really give me a specific answer other than it matches what's in their database. But I said, well, the people have to put their address on this form. How does that work with validity of signatures? Like if the address is wrong, if they use a P.O. box instead of their home address, is that going to be an issue? And they kind of hemmed and hawed about it. Hopefully the answer is it doesn't matter. But that's how they identify who the person is. And so it gets really complicated. They don't seem to really know what's going on. They don't seem to really have a clear idea of, I asked them how they defined a gathering of 100 people. If we stand outside of a Walmart, how do we know that there's 100 people in the Walmart? Do they count employees? Does that count as part of a gathering? If we're there for 6 hours, does it include everyone who walks in and out of the store during that 6 hours? And, the answer is kind of always just, we don't really know. And that's frustrating when you're depending on their answers and their assistance, and very, very, the code is all written, but you don't necessarily know all of the legal challenges. And in a year like this with COVID, it's really hard to know what the precedent will be because we don't have any. One of the really interesting challenges that's been going on this year is our code in Washington State requires a physical signature. Well, one group that's been gathering signatures has been having people physically sign on a screen with their finger. Now, by the legal definition of a wet signature, that is not pen to paper signature, but the code says physically signing the form. And that's probably a physical signature. You're touching the screen where the form is and you're signing it. The group that was doing this sent an email to the Secretary of State's office and asked if that would be sufficient. And the Secretary of State's office said, well, maybe. Send them in once you have them and we'll tell you then. So when you're trying to gather thousands of signatures potentially, and the answer to those kinds of questions is a big shrug, unless you have a lawyer on staff who is expert in these issues, because these are very specific issues and very specific case law, it's really, really tricky to know what is going to work and what isn't. And when the two-party system controls that process, they have every incentive to deny third parties that might be competitive access. So for example, in 2016, in Washington State, we needed to get 5% of the signatures, of the vote, in order to get major party status, which would allow us to bypass this whole signature gathering process. We got 5.01%. Well, the Secretary of State decided, but we didn't count the write-in signatures for this, and we really should count the write-ins and include those because this is awfully close, so we can't be sure you got over 5%. Now, mind you, for every other race, they don't count those signatures. It doesn't matter. The only reason it would ever be relevant is for a situation like this where you have to get over 5% of the vote. Well, when they counted all the write-in ballots, we were underneath 5%, so we did not get major party status. The Libertarian Party of Washington at the time was not able to make a legal challenge to that. And so now we're stuck with this. And when a minor party that already has limited resources is having to make costly legal challenges against arbitrary decisions that don't make any sense, it's really, really frustrating and it's really restrictive. And we really need a process that's controlled by a neutral third party that doesn't have an interest in blocking out minor parties.